Headline edition, July 8, 1947. The Army Air Forces has announced that a flying disc has been found and is now in the possession of the Army.
However, there have been a certain percentage of this volume of reports that have been made by credible observers of relatively incredible things.
There is very compelling evidence that we may not be alone, whatever that means.
There's a whole fleet of them. Look on the ASA. Look at that thing, dude.
American public and global public finally understands UFOs are real.
Non-human, exotic origin, vehicles that have either landed or crashed.
Hey everybody, how is it going? I hope you're all doing really well. Happy Saturday. I hope you're all doing well. I've been looking forward to this one for a few weeks now. Oh, bear with me. Multiple sounds. I'm such an amateur. My apologies. Yeah, so what I'd like to do before I introduce our guests is I just want to take a moment to remember someone in this community that unfortunately recently passed. Ethereal Aura was a friend of this channel, but also many, many channels, and was just an exceptional human being. So I just wanted to mention Ethereal Aura, and I hope you all keep him in your thoughts. And yeah, sad times, but the journey continues. So there we go. Now, one thing I also want to reiterate is that this is not just an interview. This is more of a conversation between friends. We're not here to put people in the hot seat and try and draw out as much information as we can get. This is not about that. So, you know, just wanted to lay that out there. So let's bring in some guests. This first gentleman is the co-host of That UFO podcast. He is my colleague at UAP Media UK, and he is the best travel companion and housemate that you could ask for. It is Mr. Dan Zetterstrom. How's it going, Dan?
Well, what a nice introduction. And I just want to reiterate the point you made about Ethereal Aura. You guys might have seen as we were posting videos and things like that. You might have seen this guy. This was being carried in the name of Ethereal Aura. So, you know, he was there with us in spirit, and I think that he thoroughly enjoyed the journey, and you know, we won't forget him.
Absolutely, well said. My next guest is retired US Navy Master at Arms. His continuing efforts include projects on consciousness, ancient indigenous culture, and UFO UAP destigmatization. He is also the co-founder and strategic consultant for the think tank Skyfort. Please welcome Sean Cahill. Sean, how are you doing?
I'm well, Vinnie. How are you? Good to see you, Dan.
I'm absolutely fantastic. Thank you so much for joining me today. Well, us today. Our final guest is running slightly late. I believe he's been on another interview, and I completely understand he probably needs some time to ground himself and all that good stuff. So we'll just get the conversation started, and I'm going to start with a little bit of an elephant in the room, which is I like to normally ease into things, but with everything that's happening around us in the world right now, I thought we'd just talk about the Ukraine and the situation. I've had a lot of people asking me questions with regards to, does it relate to disclosure and the UAP subject? So we can tackle it from that angle, or we can just tackle it from the humanity aspect. So either of you gentlemen want to chime in, please be my guest.
I wouldn't know where to go to connect it to the subject of UAP. I wouldn't even know where to begin to fictionalize a tale like that at the moment. The geopolitical situation is one that, you know, as any, it's multifaceted, and it's based upon specific ideologies or wants or needs. As a populace, I feel like we're inundated with information, but at the least informed as we've ever been. So I feel like I'm at a point now where I couldn't even say what the situation is. I can say what the situation a lot of people are telling me it is. But it's a different time we live in now.
Absolutely. Dan, any thoughts?
There was this interesting moment when we were out in Colombia where I realized that it'd been maybe a week and a half before, and since any of us had actually read the news. And what's happening with Ukraine and Russia was, you know, on everyone's lips when we first got there, but it kind of fell away. and we were just left with this human connection in some ways across the political aisle as well. You know, some of the members with us were totally opposite ideologically to us, but it's moments like this and kind of coming back to this world that you realize that that connection is what keeps us going. And as horrifying as the news is, you know, remember that phrase to look for the helpers, because I find that so much more powerful than looking at, you know, the greed of one madman.
Yeah, absolutely. Kind of leads me into my next sort of, I was going to say question, but it's not really. It's a talking point. And that's, what does it mean to be human, you know, with everything that's going on? And how does that put us in a place with relation to the phenomenon?
I think that's a very easy one to draw a metaphor to, because we're looking at perfect examples of human failure all around us right now. And a lot of times we focus on those because they hurt the most and they're the most polarizing. At the same time, there has to be another side of that coin. As Dan said, there have to be the helpers and the people who are approaching this differently. And I think that as I said earlier, it's a modern world, but that given that we have more people now who understand words like mindfulness or self-awareness, and grace as it pertains to the way we should treat each other. And it would seem to me that at this point in our history, we should be able to fix these problems, especially in a situation like this where there was not an initial act of aggression on the local forces in any way, shape, or form. That what we're looking at is saber-rattling strategic nonsense, and that's ultimately going to end lives and destroy property. There should be a way around that now. We should be better than that. And I think more of us should stomp our foot and yell at the bad man less, and say, why is it that we can't reach the bad man and bad people of the world and ask them to compromise? Because there certainly is enough to go around. If we treated it differently, and I'm not leaning towards one political ideology or another. I think they're all crap, frankly, because they all draw fences around smaller and smaller groups. And we should be trying to break those fences down, increase our circles, increase the circle of humanity. And strangely enough, at this modern point in our era, we're tribalizing further, we're polarizing further, and we're picking smaller and smaller sides and then hiding from the rest of us. And I just think that a lot of people would say that that's wishy-washy nonsense. Well, sooner or later you have to turn the other cheek, or you're just fighting constantly. Someone has to at some point. Now, and unfortunately, most of us don't want to be the person that does that. We want the other person to, and I think that ultimately it probably speaks to where we are with whatever the phenomenon is as a whole, because it certainly speaks to our humanity.
Yeah. Well said. Yeah. Dan, any thoughts?
I mean, this was one of the questions I had written down that I was really curious. Sean appeared, for a little context for people, Sean appeared on That UFO Podcast Discord yesterday, and he was asked what question we should ask Lou to elicit a very interesting response, and the question of what it means to be human came up. So this is definitely one where I'd rather listen than ask. And so I'm gonna politically sidestep, I guess.
No, not a problem at all.
Well, since we're friends, I'm gonna give Dan hell over that, because we spend a lot of our personal time talking about just that subject. And Dan's somebody that I rely on for his insight. Dan's a beautiful soul. If you know him, you know that's true. And you also know that there's a hell of an intellect and a heart behind that soul too. And I'm not gonna make it that easy for you, man. I've got to watch you as a human. You've got to watch me as a human. We've talked about that kind of thing since we met each other.
Sure.
And we've both shared some personal mistakes or journeys that we've been through. I mean, I've at least learned that you're one of those people that when I want to know what it is to be a human, I turn to you. So I'm sorry, bro. I want to hear what you have to say.
Okay, that's fair. I'll give you that one.
I can kind of I'm backing Sean on this one, Dan, because I was lucky enough to spend a lot of time with you recently, and it shines out of you, man. You know, there's no way around it.
Okay. So what does it mean to be human for me? I guess the notion of free will could come up, but not in the sense that we get to make our own choices, because very rarely do we. We're often kind of just a product of our environment, whether it's through gene memory or the society we were born into. But in the sense that we get to choose en masse where the energy we spend goes, whether that's into kind of bettering ourselves or bettering society or building a bigger bank account or something like that. And I think to be human is to be given the opportunity to make those better choices and to choose compassion and to choose empathy every single time. Because if you're doing something and it feels hard, you're usually making the right choice, I would say, especially when it comes to compassion. And you kind of have to bury your lesser instincts deep down. And I think just that moment of choice there is what it means to be human. There aren't many other things that get to have that instant reflection, I guess.
Yeah, well said, man.
How's that?
That's amazing. I'm sorry to kind of cut that chat. I've just noticed we've got a $5 super chat from Thomas. Thank you so much. Thomas says, help support Vinnie in his service to disclosure. Thanks for bringing on Lou, Sean, with you and Dan. Well, as you can see across the bottom of the screen, guys, and I probably should have mentioned this at the start, any super chats today will be donated to CARE's Ukraine Crisis Fund. I battled in my brain today about whether to do that or not, because normally I turn super chats off for interviews with Lou when I know it's going to get, or can potentially get bombarded with questions and things like that. But I just thought, you know what, I can't feel bad for wanting to help. We've got a big Ukrainian community here in Sheffield in the north of England, and I've seen things all over Facebook today about people needing donations and things to help families and stuff. So I thought, I don't want to be made to feel bad for doing that, so I'm just going to put it out there. So sorry to kind of cut the conversation off, Dan. That was a great point, and thank you, Thomas. Let's move on. And Sean, I think this is probably more aimed at you, and I'd like to talk about the 5 pillars of UAP engagement, which I know I'm sure you've had a massive role in. That was something that I first spoke with Lou about last year, and I'm wondering, has that been going as planned, or have you had to kind of make alterations to fit the way the subject has been moving through the political realms and the social realms, I suppose?
I believe that was it George Patton, I'm not sure, that said that that plans are I'm gonna mess this quote up. See, I went too hard at it. I should have just said something vague. Plans are planning is essential. Plans are useless. And so having something like the 5 pillars, it holds up ideals. It gives you a baseline for how to operate. And so certainly it has not gone in a linear syllabus kind of way, because as our earlier discussion, we're dealing with human beings. We're not, there's no aliens hiding that I know of that I can point to that we're dealing with. So it's just human beings. And so it's all of those same failings, successes, triumphs, and cognitive biases and personal relationships and all those other things. So, and beyond that, we live in a world that our geopolitical landscape that most of us are either willingly or unwillingly participating in doesn't recognize phenomena as a real thing, an influence, as part of the world we live in, as part of the larger structure. And so that means that what we call everyday life or real life, which is a ridiculous phrase, frankly, because it's probably the most artificial thing that we're doing, is what we call real life. But that artificial cultural construct that we all live in yanks every one of us back into reality and changes the flow of information and things like that. And I would say that they're a masterful foundation, but it has required lots of last minute fixes and new lines to be run and things like that, if I can stretch the metaphor.
Excellent. And do you feel the media has been doing its job well enough with regards to to that? Because I know the engagement between
my short Welsh friend just realized that her mom got home. So I have a corgi. Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, it's just the media. Do you think the media have been keeping up with? Because I know they've been engaged, and we've seen some good stuff, but we've also seen some not so good stuff. I'll put it like that.
Well, I think we have, we tend to lump people into categories and titles and things like that. So you have the title of journalist. And to us, journalists should, each of us have our own ideal as to what journalistic integrity means. But then within that pool of people who call themselves journalists or bloggers or just writers in general, we have a lot of different wants, expectations, and needs by the people that are creating content or seeking out content to report. So when we say, is the media doing their job? On the one hand, yes, they're certainly representing their advertisers. But on the other hand, what does our media investigate and what does our media report back to the populace? And some people would say that I might be a hippie for saying it. I don't think so. I think it's a modern era to say that our media and our social media manipulates us. That the algorithm looks for what gives us the quickest dopamine fix or gets the most ad revenue out of that content, because that's who's paying for that content. As much as I love the Marvel movies and I love the cast and think they did a great job, I'm not under any illusion that someone didn't do that for money and for personal gain and created a great deal of power and influence that I believe it's put right back into that same system. I don't see it being shunted off into areas that would improve humanity. So are they doing their job? Yeah, I just think that their job at the end of the day doesn't necessarily benefit all of us. And I'm sure a lot of journalists would take that personally. But I think that if we asked people to be more additive to the conversation they're having, rather than polarizing, rather than shocking, I feel like we've kind of lost our way in the fact that so many of us are willing to find an excuse to say it's not my fault. I'm just reporting it, or I'm just asking questions, or I'm just playing devil's advocate, or I'm just being contrary. And that has its use at some point, but the media is not finding this as the important subject that it is. They're not finding it as the world-changing and world-affecting subject that it is. It may be because it's too heavy, but we do have to ask the question: is what are the advertisers interested in, and how do we get around that being the control structure of our information system?
Dan, what do you think about the media? I mean, you can answer this from the UK perspective because of the way that, unfortunately, some of our tabloids are going at the moment. What do you think?
Sean is right. It's almost like we have the wrong incentive to have conducive conversations to things that actually develop. If the stock market tracked human happiness, I'm sure we'd be discussing different things and how they affect the world, right? But instead, we all for some reason agreed that money was the way and tracking goods was the way, and now we're kind of in a position where the very mechanism that the Western world functions by is being taken advantage of. So we're not even. It's a very. I kind of have to touch on Ukraine a little bit, because seeing how it's being portrayed in the media from different points of view all over the world simultaneously is really informing how I see the conflict. We read about World War I and World War II and the Cuban Missile Crisis and all of these things. And we have very unique perspectives on them because we're reading after the fact. But actually living through one, and one that we can see from multiple angles at the same time, is, it's horrifying, and it's as horrifying as it is interesting in some ways, because you're seeing how that message is manipulated depending on what the incentive is for the person writing it. So I basically back what Sean said, that we essentially need some kind of institutional change that shifts what we're actually after as a species, and looking to the helpers, as I said earlier. It kind of shows the the winds of change coming through. You know, what was that quote, that the moral arc of the universe always bends towards justice? And I think you can see that in a lot of ways in the world right now, especially through the media.
Yeah,
I think
absolutely.
we could segue right into politics on that, because I mean, again, individuals make up groups, groups present edifices, and those groups are almost always made out of well-intentioned individuals. You know, any of us who've known a politician who's beginning their career, they're the most invigorating, believable, authentic people that you can meet. But 20 years later, if they're still pacing the same halls, they're not the same person that began that journey, and they don't have this. They seem to have the same vigor or care. So I don't want to, you know, I don't want to call out journalism, as I want to say that we're talking about the media, and I think the media is an edifice. It has transcended that individuality, and it's become something that's almost self-sustaining. And that again, self-sustaining systems like that, how do you slow the wheel down enough without breaking it to make some changes? You know.
Yeah. Absolutely. I'm just looking at the time. I noticed Lou's not here yet. I have sent him a private message and he's not responded. So apologies to everyone watching. Yeah, I'm sure it's not purposefully. We'll just have to wait and see. We'll give him a break. It's all good. I'm just sorry. I keep looking off to the side because I've got notes and questions, and I'm going to jump between a few. Sean, if you don't mind, because you mentioned something on last night with that UFO podcast on the Discord about a sighting that you had of a triangle. Now, that's something I'd never heard of before, and I just wondered if you'd
Sure.
If you'd be okay to tell us about it again.
Yeah. I purposefully up until recently haven't talked too much about any sightings that I've had. I don't feel that as an individual my sightings are compelling enough that they provide evidence. They're just anecdotal.
Sure.
Something that I add to the pile of other people's stories and look for connections. But I'll give you a more detailed explanation. It was probably around 11:30. It was near midnight. I think between the hours of 11 and midnight. My family was asleep. It had been a long day. For some reason, I was still in my uniform. I was still in khakis, and I was sitting outside, chain smoking and playing a video game called E-Republic. And I've been hyper focused, very tunnel visioned on the screen, to the point that I didn't even see the whole world around me, because you know how it is. I was outside in the dark at a little bistro table in my yard. And looking back, I wasn't a meditator at the time, but looking back, that was flow state. I was in flow. I was writing and playing the game and very focused. And when I finally decided just to reach up and close the computer, because I knew it was getting too late, I had to be up early and everything else. I closed the computer and I stood up, and I was standing just outside my front door facing due east, smoking a cigarette. And I was looking out at a totally clear night sky. And I was looking at the stars that were above the horizon, and they were blinking. They were going away. The stars were basically, being occluded by something. And I could tell that this thing was moving from the horizon slowly because of the way that stars were disappearing. But I couldn't figure out if I was looking at a large rain cloud. But I mean, all these things were happening at once, and a lot of it, the recall is weird to try to do. But I knew the wind was blowing in the opposite direction. A lot of things didn't make sense, and I'm squinting and really getting interested in what this thing is. And as it starts to actually, the apex of it starts to actually go over the top of my house, and people are going to ask me the altitude. It's really hard to gauge because the size of the thing was ridiculous. So it seemed to be at least a couple of football fields wide, meaning a couple of 100 yards from tip to tip. I guess that would mean, equilateral, because it was equilateral. It had no lights that I could see. It was reflecting, now that I think about it, it was reflecting a small amount of moonlight, and I heard the wind going over. It seemed I heard the wind as it was moving. I heard the wind over the outside of the craft, as if you were moving something large through the air, but there's no engine sound. As it passed overhead, I was kind of going ape. I mean, I just couldn't believe. The Tic Tac had been 5 or 6 months before. And there was a 48-hour period on board the ship where I knew we had had a Roswell type event that should go down in history. And we didn't seem to care about it. And I think I kind of compartmentalized that. You know, I went a lot of different directions with it. I just assumed it's probably us. That was a really safe feeling to have, knowing I didn't want to be floating out for the next 12 years, knowing that there was crazy tech surrounding us. So who knows what I did psychologically, but five or so months later, I just wasn't ready to turn around and see that. Yeah. And as it went over the top, as it went overhead, it sped up. And we used to have these 2 really large palm trees for reference that I turned around and I watched it go over the top of the palm tree. And I was going to lose sight of it right behind the palm tree. And I ran to the west end of my yard and jumped up on this rickety table we had built. And I remembered the next morning because I busted off the bistro umbrella. It's wooden. It had this little brass thing in the middle, and I just cracked it right in half, jumping up on the table to catch one last glimpse of this thing as it tipped over on its port wing edge. And just, we have this term in the Navy called, we say zorched. It's just zorched. It was, and I say it got smaller or it went away, because without sound and light reference and no effect, you know, given that we're talking about the phenomenon, we assume, I can't say exactly what it did. It just receded. It went away from my vision and perception. And I stood on top of that table for probably 5 minutes, just jaw agape, repeating expletives under my breath. And I just went to bed. I never told anybody about that. I mean, I drew it. I wrote down what happened. But I wasn't somebody who was like, holy crap, I just saw a giant UFO. Yeah. No, I told friends and family about the Tic Tac incident. Like I said, I wasn't asked to sign an NDA. There was no classification around it. And so when it came out in the news, they knew exactly what they were looking at, friends and family. They were the ones that were telling me about the Times article. But people ask me, what did you think it was? Where do you think it's from? I don't have any of those answers. It was a big black triangle. It didn't make any noise. It was going super slow, and it was way too big. Yeah. And at this point in my career, my second career of what we all do with this subject, I don't believe that was tech made by you and I or anybody with an email address or that pays taxes or lives in the world that we operate in. I can't find a way to make that fit. But I know I saw what I saw. And when I got back up in the morning, I went out and the umbrella was broken and the cigarette butts were on the ground next to the table. And I have a memory and I have a period of sleep in between.
Yeah, I get it. I get it. And I was sorry to interrupt. I was just going to say, you said that a lot of friends or family that you told were saying, you know, what is it, or what do you think it is? My first response to question you on that would be, did your views on it change over the years between when it happened and in between to now, and the way you've revisited it in your head?
Yeah. For me, 04, for a long time, I just assumed the Tic Tac was our tech. And I was ready to accept that it wasn't, you know, once I saw proof. But at that time, and as I said, the way that our chain of command reacted, some of the senior people in that chain of command were just not concerned. Now I know there's been significant evidence presented to some people who look at it and go, yeah, so what? I don't know why that happens for some people. I don't know why some people take evidence more seriously than others. The triangle, I got to be honest with you, I just didn't think about it. I found myself about 6 months after we filmed Unidentified. I had a good friendship with a couple of people that we had filmed with, and separate from Lou, and we maintained a chat about the phenomenon in general. And we had sorry, I kind of lost my train of thought. We really talked about, you know, what's sorry, the dogs, for some reason the dogs get me. Hearing the dog bark.
It's absolutely fine.
My friends asked me, we would have these conversations, and I would be like, oh, I kind of had an experience like that once, because I've seen a lot of this stuff in my life. And I realized I wasn't really keeping track of any of that. I didn't have a real log of it. Hadn't put it all in one place. And my friends knew that I had a big whiteboard in my garage where I had my office set up. And they said, why don't you take some time, meditate, and try, just then go up to the whiteboard and just start writing down everything weird that ever happened, everything that ever had, every time you ever questioned, frankly, reality.
Yeah.
Because something was poking in there or appearing that didn't seem like it should. There was a big list. And I had a bit of I don't want to say, not a breakdown. I would say I was emotional. I was in the kitchen, and I was leaning against the counter, and my wife came down. She saw that. I mean, when you see a big dude like me with puffy eyes and tears on his face, you want to know what's going on. And I told her, I said, I filled the whiteboard in the garage with memories of really weird stuff. And, and as every one I remembered kind of brought up another one, and I got to the end and I kind of felt like I was losing my marbles, because I was like, what's going on in my life? So what made it even easier, and I'm being sarcastic, is that as she leans in to give me this huge hug and leans her head on my chest, both of us are looking towards the sink in the kitchen. Basically, we watch a cereal bowl jump over a bunch of other stuff into the sink. And we saw it in broad daylight. And we both just immediately broke our embrace and kind of did that curious dog look, and then just started saying things it must be. It must have slid. Something must have moved when we weren't looking. It must have slid. There's water on the counter. There must be some kind of surface tension. And then we were like, and then one of us looked at the other. I can't remember who it was, but we were like, no, that bowl jumped over a bunch of crap and went into the sink. And her knees got a little weak, and I grabbed the counter, and we just both looked at each other, and we were like, all right, that happened, and now it's over. And looking back, I think that was how a lot of those moments in my life went, where I just went, what the heck am I looking at? And then when I was done, I was like, well, got to go get the groceries. I mean, I don't know that everybody has that same reaction. Some people never come back from that. What the hell is it?
Yeah.
And I don't know if they've got it right or if I've got it right. But it's now, I don't know what they are. I know what shape they are. I know what we all assume they are. We all assume, we like to call them aliens, but I've been exposed to so many different iterations or possibilities that fall under that term. We haven't put too much time into considering that something else could be living here with us in the oceans, or in an environment that we don't access or necessarily perceive. The way they operate tells us that our physics books aren't completely written. The reports from witnesses and so-called experiencers tell us that our psychology books aren't finished being written. And the way that it all dovetails into our religious mythos across the globe tells us that we don't even have a consolidated worldview of spirit. So what do you do but just go help? We all need to help each other with this, and so that's the conversation that we've been talking about for so long, that we need to change, is just the acknowledgement that it's real. I mean, all of it, as I say, like a broken record, those of us in the community that pay attention have a wealth of knowledge, or have been exposed to a wealth of ideas that your average person hasn't taken a minute to do, beyond an occasional Ancient Aliens or maybe a science fiction movie. So it's daunting, but here we are. I mean, we are another one of those positive conversations, trying to be additive, not saying I'm going to put on this very safe skeptic's hat, or contrarian hat, and I'm going to cherry pick things that fit a negative narrative that I intend to prove. That I just caged it very negatively, but at the end of the day, we need skeptics, but skeptics have to come along with the data as well.
Yeah.
To be a skeptic for the sake of being a skeptic just kind of makes you an a-hole. I mean, it's, in my opinion, because what are you building? What are you leaving behind besides a vacuum?
No, you're right. Absolutely. I could pull a million questions out of that. That was incredible. Thank you so much. I was picturing, as you spoke to it, the ball jumping in my head and imagining my reaction, and I don't think I'd handle it as well as you did, to be honest. I'm just going to take a minute to stop right now to bring in our last guest. Please welcome Mr. Lou Elizondo. How's it going, Lou?
Hey, gents, forgive me. I totally suck. I thought it was at 2:00 Mountain Time. And, my calendar, obviously, look, guys, I'm obviously not technically proficient. You know, my wife says I'm limited. She's clearly right. You know, when I was a kid, my mother used to say I can't have nice things. So, I mean, obviously, I don't know how to use a calendar. So, mea culpa, my apologies. So anyways, here I am. Sorry.
It's all good. I've been watching you previously on Tony's channel. Fantastic conversation, by the way. So refreshing.
Thank you.
So refreshing. Chris Leto, I've spoken to him many times. Great guy. Alexi, what a brain. What a brain.
Yeah, a lot of fun, you know. Really, it was totally just more esoteric, not really. I mean, there was a couple things UAP related, but you know, it was neat to just kind of, you know, I always resist going down the rabbit hole. And you know, Sean will sometimes pull me down the rabbit hole, kicking and screaming. But it's good. It's good to, you know, have conversations sometimes that are a little bit more esoteric, because, you know, it forces you to think outside of your current paradigm, right? It forces you to think out of the nice, neat little shiny box that we all build for ourselves, that we're all comfortable in. And, you know, sometimes you have to be outside of your comfort zone in order to have new perspectives. And so, you know, I really appreciated that conversation we had. I thought it was neat. You know, for the record, I'm not an expert in astrophysics or anything like that, or philosophy. So it was more or less just, you know, personal perspectives being shared back and forth.
Yeah, absolutely. It was a conversation. There was, you know, even watching you, Lou, be the one asking the questions was a breath of fresh air. It was fantastic. So yeah, that was great.
Thanks. I hope I didn't monopolize the conversation. My wife says I have a tendency to do that sometimes, so I'm always trying to be mindful, you know. But I'm just so eager to share in the conversation. I love it, you know. Maybe it's my you know, being Latino, we tend to talk over each other, and it's kind of cultural for us. But I apologize if I seem to do that too much.
Not at all. Not at all. Just to bring you up to speed on what we've been chatting about, we opened up with just a little brief chat about what's happening with the Ukraine, and that I just felt we'd get the elephant out.
You know, look, guys, what a tragedy. You know, this Ukraine incident is a lot like the Titanic. You know, there's been a whole sequence of missteps and calculations for us to be where we are today. You know, we can't just put our finger on one thing and say, you know, that's the reason why. This has been a long time coming. And, you know, this is proof that, you know, there are still bullies in the world. There are individuals out there that don't have necessarily the best interests of their fellow man. You know, it's very, very sad. And especially with someone like Russia, who, by the way, are very, very capable. These folks are extremely intelligent. They conduct warfare asymmetrically. They are, you know, you're looking at true chess masters that understand the chessboard, in some cases even better than us. And so, you know, this is no joke. There's people's lives at stake, and innocent people's lives at stake. And yeah, it's disheartening. And, you know, I'll tell you what, though, let this be a reminder. You know, and this isn't fear mongering. This is reality. What happened in the Ukraine and what's happening in Ukraine can happen in other places. And this is why we have to remain diligent, and why we always can't take for granted, you know, our country and our elected officials. We, as a citizens, as a people, must have an active have an active role in our governance. We can never allow other people to just make decisions on our behalf. And that's why we have to elect good people into office, so we can make good decisions and, hopefully avoid things like this happening in the future. Again, I'm not laying blame to any particular side. This is not time for that. This is just recognizing that there's a lot of people suffering in the world right now. A lot. My wife's background is Eastern European. In fact, for a long time we would tell people Czechoslovakian or Hungarian, but in reality, her family comes from a small town in the Ukraine, and yeah, this has been tough. This has been tough. Especially civilians. You never want to. Warfare is bad enough as it is, but when you involve civilians and women and children, and I just, it's terrible.
Yeah.
Sorry,
absolutely.
my wife it just busted in here reminding me. For the record, I'm on and I'm with Vinnie and Dan and Sean. Yes, I know the time was off. I was late by half an hour.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Hi,
So,
Jennifer.
You can beat me later. They said hi. Yeah, I know. It was on my calendar for 2, and then the things started going crazy, and I'm like, oh my God, something happened. So my wife just came in here to remind me the same thing.
Oh, that's lovely. And if Jennifer does have any family and relatives over there, obviously our thoughts are with them as well as the rest of the population. So yeah, thank you for your insight into that as well, Lou. One other point we touched upon, I asked a question to Sean regarding the 5 pillars of UAP engagement, which you brought to us last year. And my question was whether between when you first told us about it to now, has it had to be altered slightly at all to fit with the way that things have gone politically and socially?
Well, actually, the pillars have been there all along for the last 4 years.
Right.
I just decided to for some people, because they keep asking you the same question. Well, what's your strategy? And we do have a strategy, but of course, like everybody will tell you, war plans are only as good as until you start the battle, and then you start with new ones, because nothing ever goes like you think it will. So we always have to be flexible. This is what I think what makes the team so good, because you have people like Sean and folks and other folks, frankly, folks like you that can bring new perspectives as the environment changes, as the landscape changes. You have to be prepared to adapt to that. I think the strategy is the same, but the good thing about a good strategy is you never have to, you can, if it's a really good strategy, you can stay on that strategy, and it's in such a way that allows you the flexibility to maneuver, right? It allows you to adjust, lift and shift, as we like to say. So yeah, I think we always have to be prepared to be flexible, because people are people, and new issues come up, and new revelations and new information, and you have to be prepared to absorb that into your calculus. And sometimes if you're lucky, not unlucky, but if you're lucky, it actually will help reshape how you look at things and think of things and your approach. And so that's always fun when you have new information that's kind of revelatory, right? And you're now forced to reassess, okay, well, is it time for us to put more pressure on this column or on this column or on that column? And that's a deliberative process. This isn't, World According to Lou or World According to Chris Mellon or the U.S. government or anybody else. We all have this conversation together. And Sean has been a critical part of that. You all have been part of that. Your audience has been part of that. A lot of the people in the audience may not realize that they're an integral piece to this. They say, well, what have I been able to do? Well, have you written your congressman or representative or your elected official in your country over the last 4 years? If you have, guess what? You're part of it. Have you had a conversation over a water cooler, maybe at work or over the dining room table with a family member? Well, guess what? If you have, you're part of it. This is something that we're all engaged in collectively, and it's beautiful to see. It really is, to see how far we've come. We now have law, historic for the first time ever in U.S. government history, law on this topic, and you've got a bunch of other things that are happening for the first time ever in this country. You know, you have the acknowledgement by senior level officials. You have people testifying in Congress, and in order for them to get their job, let's say the DODIG, they owe some answers to Congress on what they're going to do about this topic, right? I mean, this is open hearing. This is like, holy crap, guys! You know, this is for the record forever and ever and ever and ever and ever. So, yeah, it's. I guess in short, I think we're doing quite well, but of course you always have to be flexible and be prepared to lift and shift your priorities as the environment evolves.
Yeah, absolutely. Excuse me. And you mentioned there the audience and people saying, well, what have I done, if they're sort of sat just absorbing the information and the videos and everything. I mean, I think that's great in itself, that they're actively just interested. But for anybody that actually did want to take that next step, whether it be researching, investigating, I mean, I've had a lot of people say to me, but it's too much of a big step for me to do that. Is there any way that you can talk about it? I think you know what I'm trying to say. Like, how can people get more involved?
I think Sean's got some ideas.
I've faced that a lot because we talk about, you know, a larger team. We talk about that the audience and some of the people that are at the center of this, maybe, that they are on the same team. And I believe that. I truly do. But just as there is with our political process, where a lot of us have ceded a certain amount of responsibility to others, and are assuming that they're going to act in our stead and do what's right for us. If you're truly interested, you have to find out where you've ceded that responsibility to others, and you have to take it back. So in this case, a lot of people want to make that jump to be, and I'll just go point blank and say they want to be on our team and in our room or on our phone tree. And yes, we need a lot of help, but it's not a blanket call for a grassroots constituency. It's not a rabble. It's not a mob. And so first you have to find your own place. You have to find out, first of all, what is your ideology? How unshakable is it? How far are you willing to take it? And then you need to take the steps to do that. It's not a question of someone else allowing you access or pointing you in the right direction. It really is, if you're going to dedicate yourself to, let me make a metaphor. The general public is at the center of this immense jungle of confirmation bias and incorrect information that all of us are collectively trying to hack our way through just to expose them to a certain data set that we can all agree upon. That's an arduous trek. This isn't easy. And so when people say, how do I get involved? First, measure yourself and then act, frankly. Whether it's finding a MUFON near you, starting your own local, just getting on a Discord chat, you know, getting on Reddit and getting in a different community, something other than Twitter that isn't so much polarizing or advertising. To me, that's what's going to be most successful. This is not a bandwagon. It's not a genre. It's not an aesthetic. It's not even a collective ideology, because you can't get 5 of us in the same room that have the same opinions about the unknown. So I'll step off the soapbox on that, but it's personal.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I've got a.
Sorry, go on, Lou.
Sorry, just real quick. I'd like to add to
Sure.
that. I think Sean's absolutely right. Look, I think what we do, if you want to know what you can do, lead by example. Let me give you a real example there. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yeah.
Okay, good. I'm having some trouble with my earpods. Let me give you an example. Dan and I recently agreed to go ahead and use this platform of the UAP topic and UFO Twitter to raise awareness and raise money for some folks for St. Jude, right? Children who have cancer and have life-threatening illnesses, and also animal welfare, right? Thousands and thousands of dollars was raised by the UAP Twitter community for a cause that wasn't even about UFOs. It was about humanity, right? Now, when in history has a UFO community ever donated to anything other than topics about UFOs? Well, guess what? That just happened. Don't look now, but the UAP community just helped mankind writ large on something that has nothing to do about UFOs, right? That's leading by example. That's what I mean. You're doing something, you are an ambassador, you're representing this topic, and you're being generous and you're giving to a worthy cause that has nothing to do with the topic, right? You know, that I could be wrong, but I don't ever remember any type of UFO event where they donated 100% of the money to charity, right? To kids and animals. I don't. And yet that's exactly what happened for the first time in perhaps, I think it's true, in the history of this community, that we raised thousands and thousands of dollars that went to help kids and animals, right? People, I mean, to a group of people who probably never even considered the topic of UFOs. That's what this community has been able to do. And that's magic. That's remarkable. It didn't go to line the pockets of anybody. It went to help people who have no idea we even exist. And you know what? We didn't even ask credit for it. So isn't that wonderful? And those are some of the steps that we can do, that if, you know, you don't have to necessarily get out there with a you know, black t-shirt that says, you know, UFOs and I want to believe, and, you know, let me talk to you. It's just about leading your life by example, you know, being a better human being, treat others, you know, the way you would want to be treated. And I think that says a lot, you know, as much as we may bicker and argue on UFO Twitter, minus a couple rabble rousers out there that really don't have any interest in the truth. Most people, you know, I think do want the truth. They're very passionate. They really want, you know, to have answers. They're frustrated, rightfully so. It's been 70 years, right? And they want answers, and frankly, they deserve those answers. But we also have shown that we can do incredible acts of kindness when we want to, and we all agree to. And that's in large part because of the work that Sean and Dan and you, Vinnie, and your incredible audience have played a role in this. You know, we just helped out in a very small way humanity. And we did that because you guys created this enclave called UFO Twitter, where we could talk about, sometimes very passionately, about this topic. And what was the result? Well, it resulted in $20-some thousand being provided to children and animals. So, you know, I'm super proud of that. I really am. And I see here you have something here with money going to the Ukraine Crisis Fund. You know, this is fantastic. These are causes we can all get around. We can all rally around, put our differences aside for just a minute, and say, you know, that's what the UFO community can do. You know.
Yeah, I'm just going to take this second, Dan. I'm going to come to you because I miss your voice already. You know, I'm so used to being with you, spending 2 weeks with you. But the community right now, I probably mentioned the fund about 45 minutes ago, and we're about $500 in now. So you guys are absolutely incredible. Yes, YouTube will take a little cut. I didn't think of that. I'm sorry. I just wanted to.
Well, in that case, we need to donate more, right? So if YouTube's going to take a little cut, you know, or maybe we can call out YouTube and say, hey guys, with one case, can you not take a cut and let?
I like
you know,
that.
Let's give it to the people who need it. You know, this is hugely important. You know, it really is. I did a talk not too long ago. I won't say for which outlet, but involved veterans, and the outlet was gonna pay me, and I said no. You know, I don't take money for that kind of stuff. You know, charity is something that we should all be part of. And, you know, that's maybe one of the good things about organized religion, that, you know, there is tithing. I think it keeps us humble. I think it keeps us grounded when we realize we do owe something to our fellow man, to our brothers and sisters out there. And if we have a means to give, then we should.
No, absolutely. Now, Dan, just following on from the conversation about people wanting to get more involved in investigating and things like that, we were very lucky enough to be able to go out to Colombia to investigate a case out there, or maybe a couple of cases out there. But we also have talked about a case close to us, the Longdendale Lights, about going and looking into that case. So just talk about how people could even look to what's around them locally, and I'll go out and look into it, ask questions, knock on doors, maybe not just knock on doors. But do you know what I mean? Do you know what I'm getting at? How would you see that, and how would you sort of direct people into wanting to get a bit more boots on the ground, maybe?
I mean, everyone has their kind of favorite area of expertise. And for me, one of those areas was the Hessdalen lights. You know, I grew up when I was a teenager, I'd watch those 24/7 video streams, and I never saw anything when I was watching, but it fascinates me, and it's still a very relevant part of the conversation. And those guys produced a long form study paper. And in the back of that paper, they list various areas around the world that have similar phenomena going on in them, whether it's the Brown Mountain lights, the Min Min lights in Australia. There seems to be a common phenomena around the planet that has many different names that you can contribute to this subject by studying. I feel like we went and did that with one of them in Colombia, and the results of that will be forthcoming. You know, the gentlemen here, Lou and Sean, were very gracious to give us their time to help direct us a little bit while we were out there. But these places exist everywhere. And I feel like when Biden signed the UAP investigation bill, it was kind of a green light that this is legitimately how we could go spend our time now. So, you know, Vinnie and I just did that for 2 weeks, and we want to kind of get back out there and dig in. But I'd recommend people, you know, just do a little bit of Googling, have a read of those papers, talk to people in those areas where lights are seen, and yeah, just get boots on the ground and get photographing, throw the common modern technology at it, and let's see what we can get.
Well, if I can
And Dan,
add,
if I can
remember that
jump
it's a,
in,
Oh, sure.
go ahead, Sean.
I
Go
was
ahead.
just going to say, remember, it's a journey. I talk to so many people that want one chance at that 3-pointer or that slam dunk. They just want to hit the bell really hard, and I don't want to stamp on that kind of energy, but it is a stairway, and it is tall, and it is a process, and there's falling. So, you know, keep your heart and stay to it.
And Dan, I'll tell you, man, you and Vinny really succeeded. I'm not going to let the cat out of the bag, but you know, you guys had one hell of a coalition when you were in Colombia. You know, this was, you know, you guys talk about boots on the ground. You had a pretty good assortment of individuals. Again, I'm not going to say who, but I know that Sean and I were pretty impressed when we saw who you had down there, right? And you were doing your own investigation, and that's, I mean, that's talk about boots on the ground. You guys really did. And that's something that anybody can do. You know, you don't have to be necessarily a trained expert in investigations. You don't have to be a special agent or counterintelligence. You know, you can just ask the obvious questions, the 5 interrogatives, right? Who, what, when, where, how, and why, and start with that. You know, what are just, you know, what are the questions you would want to know, right? What are the answers you would want to know, and then ask those questions. So, you know, I applaud what you guys did, that initiative. You know, not everybody can afford to get on a plane and fly to another country, but, you know, maybe you can get in your car and drive to the next city. Right.
Exactly.
Maybe there's some areas nearby that have some pretty interesting things happening, and you know, go out there with a camera. Maybe just take a pen and a notepad and just start taking, because you never know when that information is going to be really, really useful, you know, down the road. So that's what I would encourage people to do.
Thank you, Lou. That means a lot. Means a lot. Dan, so we'll kind of stick on that. So let's talk about the investigation that I'm going to say about what you did. I don't want to bring it on to me because you're my guest. So how did you find the investigative process, not having that kind of background or training? Did it come naturally, and did you feel like you saw the steps? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, it's kind of like Lou said, you know, it's asking the questions that we as audience members would want to know the answers to, whether it's, you know, what did you see? How long did it happen? Did it have to happen over multiple nights? Did anyone else see it? All these kind of obvious things, including did you take a photo? Did you take a video? You know, and try and gather those bits of information enough to help us not just come up with an idea of what it could be, but actually solve the thing, and say whether it's, you know, something anomalous, or whether it's just, for example, a blown transformer, or you know, just electrical failure or something like that. It was really great to kind of learn the filter of how to use information from all the team that we had there. I'm trying not to say their names, it's real hard. I can see Ashley lurking in the chat there saying you guys have an NDA, which is true. Yeah, he is the phenomenology account there. I'm sure you'll see a trailer from Ashley, and it's really not too far away in terms of watching it. We're not talking years, we're talking, you know, weeks, a month or so, and you'll get to see exactly the journey we went on. But yeah, learning the cultural meaning for these sightings was one of the biggest points of interest for me.
Yeah.
Because there are so many different interpretations of these events, and to be able to hear three completely different versions of the same event was very eye-opening in terms of how you get to the truth that's kind of in between them all.
Yeah, absolutely. And shout out to
and
Go on, Lou.
interpretation is a human thing, isn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, really, that's what it boils down to, right? At the end of the day, it's you're all looking at the same thing, but it's like the three blind men trying to describe the elephant, and one's holding onto the trunk, one's holding onto the foot, and one's holding onto the ear, and they're all describing something completely different, and yet it's all part of the same animal.
Yeah, absolutely. Sorry, I was just going to say this here phenomenology you see here on the screen is the new YouTube account where the documentary series will be put out for free, no paywall or anything. I think the first episode is coming about May the 1st. So yeah, guys, I hope you want to watch it and stuff. This is not just about the phenomenon. It's also about the journey of everyone involved from day 1 to day 14 or whatever it was. It's a human element to it just as much as there is to the phenomenon. We really wanted to portray like multifaceted angles to this experience of being an investigative group, a team, bonding, meeting new people, meeting locals, talking about a subject that we all love, but also that indigenous folk have been talking about for hundreds of years, and bringing that all together. Wow, that was something different. So please go and subscribe to the channel and all that good stuff, and look out for it, because I think people will be pleasantly surprised. Wow, where to move to next? Dan, again, I'm going to start this conversation with you, but I hope everyone else will jump in. Let's go a bit more science-based. And I know, Lou, you might be in the right mindset. You've been on that science journey tonight a little bit. I'd like to talk about DNA and DNA containers. Dan, can you kind of talk about that with us?
Oh, wow.
Throw that out there.
Yeah, just those keywords. Yeah, DNA is something that we're only kind of just starting to understand. And when people talk to me about DNA containers with messages, I think back to how, we have comets that kind of, or meteors, I should say, that get dispersed throughout the solar system that can carry those genetic codes to other places. So I wonder, when we have conversations around hybrids, people think of those, almost mad scientist aliens engineering us. And it's not necessarily that. We can have a conversation about hybrids where just genetic material is shared between different solar systems and different planets. And yeah, that's probably where I would go with that angle. But I'm curious what the guys are going to say. I'll pass it to Sean.
We have such a diversity of life here. Life is everywhere we look here. But if taken on a binary life or no life scale, we're still single point of evidence for life existing. I think the environment here probably, if the physics we observe to the edges of our observable universe appear to be the same physics that we have come to understand at this point, I think it's relatively logical for us to expand out that what has happened here has happened elsewhere. A question that really interests me is I think that everywhere we look, we can find patterns. We find patterns repeating, and we find patterns repeating in non-local areas. It makes me wonder if something like DNA is ubiquitous throughout the universe, that if there is a structure of life and the way to carry on species memory and to climb your way up into awareness. But we don't know, and we assume that what we call the phenomenon is a comparable and understandable form of life. And we've made assumptions based on what we've observed, but we don't have the evidence to go back to and to build upon. We're building upon anecdotes and scant data, at least in the public to a great extent, or at least in the community of people that feel that they're witnessing this. They don't have the answers they need. But I think that if we just remove the person or remove the personal ego from it for a minute, we've made some really ridiculous assumptions, in my opinion, about how special and unique and everything else we are. And it's just a tough one for me, because everywhere I look, I see patterns. And so it says to me that if I find an environment similar to this one elsewhere, I will probably find something similar to me. The universe is much older than my culture. My mind is open to a number of possibilities.
Yeah. Lou, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, my background in college was actually microbiology and immunology, and let me talk a little bit about what DNA is: deoxyribonucleic acid, which is really the code, the sequence for life here on this planet. The notion that amino acids can be carried through space and delivered here on this planet is nothing new. There are the building blocks of life everywhere. Methane is a perfect example of that. When you look at some of the moons, even in our own solar system, they are full of the essence, the soup, the primordial soup necessary for life. The notion of transpermia, which is that life may have come from somewhere else to here, and that's part of the way the universe works, is certainly a valid theory. I would suggest to you, and I would say, as far as hybrids are concerned, look, my background in microbiology and immunology, we are a species of hybrids. We've always have been. When you look at when Homo sapiens were mixing with Homo neanderthalis, we have been, in fact, it is genetically harmful for us. It's bad for our genetic pool if we don't have that type of diversity. What makes a healthy society is the fact that we have all sorts of different backgrounds. And most people have a very, very diverse genetic background. And that's good for the species. And it's good for here on this planet. And it's not a far leap to say, well, if it's good for this planet, that might be actually a universal trait. Maybe that is the way life exists and thrives throughout the universe, not just on our planet. And that this hybridization, I know people want to kind of go down the rabbit hole of, we're talking about alien hybrids, but let's talk about that for a minute from a very real sense. You have a virus, and I've said this before. A virus isn't really any type of life form. It doesn't even have DNA, and yet it replicates and it protects itself, and it does a lot of things that life forms do. But it uses RNA, and it can inject its own RNA to change the sequencing of DNA in a host to make more viruses, right? So to some degree, there's viruses act a lot like a life form, and some scientists have speculated that maybe they are an alien for life form, and we've just been living, some cases symbiotically, in some cases more parasitically, with alien life forms all along. You can't disprove that. There is some interesting evidence to suggest that maybe viruses aren't natural to this biome we call Earth. Again, I don't want to go too far in speculation, but there are some scientists who have said that, for the record. So I'm not, I just think we need to be careful when we say hybridization. The first thing that comes to people's minds are, aliens coming in and, having, babies with people. I won't go into detail on how that might or might not work. But let's face it, hybridization is something natural that we see in Mother Nature all the time. And our species is not immune to it. In fact, we thrive upon hybridization. That some could argue that's been the success, the secret sauce, the secret success of our species all along. So, before people start poo-pooing that idea, you better take a good, long, hard look at Mother Nature first to see that she's already doing that.
Absolutely. Yeah. Dan, anything or anyone else want to continue that at all?
I'd love to add a little generalist spin to it, that we talk about here, and we talk about what we observe and what this world is, but we forget a simple phrase like everything that is here came from space. Yeah. Nothing started this is not even a place. This is a corkscrew of a solar system that's traveling in a circle in this area in a local group around a larger supercluster, and it extends downwards toward the quantum level and upwards towards the supergalactic level as to how everything truly does interact with each other. But we act as if we are here and everything else is out there. And no, we are inside everything else with everything else, and we are everything else. With the origins aren't local to this little spot. This little spot didn't exist 10 seconds ago. We're in a new spot, and a new spot, and a new spot.
Absolutely.
So
absolutely right.
I think that when we expand that out, you don't have to stay there all the time. You'll end up just picking lint out of your belly button all day. But you have to expand your viewpoint out that just to realize that there's more to it. So, yeah.
Fabulous. Thank you so much. I'm going to stick with science for a little bit, and I'm going to come back to you, Dan, with my bullet point. I've not formulated questions because, let's be honest, I'm not intelligent enough to really do that. But I want to talk about anti-neutrinos, Dan. I know this is something that you are quite eager to talk about. So give it to us.
Yeah. So recently, Tim McMillan brought up the fact that there was an anti-neutrino study of the planet done in 2015, I think it was, that basically mapped all the occurring instances of anti-neutrinos over the planet. And the areas of interest basically signified reactors and would no doubt pick up any nuclear kind of source, like a nuclear carrier fleet or something like that. But there was also said to be mixed in that if you could look at the granular data, there might be areas of interest in terms of UAP presence as well. And yeah, Vinnie was kind of handing off to me so I could form the question and cue you guys up to see if you'd heard any link between anti-neutrinos, the study of, and whether they signify UAP interest or presence.
Sean, you want to take that?
Yeah, I personally, let me say that in the course of my discussions, we've considered a lot of means of gathering data, whether it's past environmental data, real-time data, or ways to capture more data in the future. And I often generalize that what we're doing is trying to increase our sampling of the electromagnetic spectrum, because everything, including us, is existing somewhere within that area. I've had conversations that surround the tech, but I'm not a physicist. So as far as hearing rumors or things like that, no, I haven't heard rumors. I've heard scientists discuss possibilities of utilizing systems. I don't know how far that may have been socialized outside of my group. I'm sure that there are plenty of people in those realms that may or may not be interested in this as the subject advances into the scientific realm.
I'll jump on that too, just for a quick second here. You know, I'm not familiar with anti-neutrinos. I am familiar a little bit with the notion of neutrinos, and the problem with neutrinos is that, well, first of all, they are super pervasive, but they are also super elusive. For being so prominent, and you know, one of the sources of that is nuclear fusion and the core of our sun. So we're constantly being bathed in neutrinos. The problem is detecting them, and right now it's a matter of technology that we simply don't have the technology required to study them as much as we would like to. Right now, we have to have a neutrino tank buried, you know, thousands and thousands of feet under the Earth's surface in order to just detect it. And basically, in essence, in theory, a neutrino hits this tank. It interacts with a liquid, water in this case, and as a result, it releases a photon of light that can be measured. And in practice, it sounds well. In theory, it sounds easy. In practice, not so much. It's a lot more challenging, and so we may have to wait. I guess, long story short, here, Dan and Vinnie, is for the technology to catch up before we could use that type of capability in any way as it relates to UAP. I'm not saying it doesn't work. What I'm simply saying is we may have to wait a few years until we have the technology to apply that in the study of UAP.
Are there any other scientific avenues that may be looking at historical data or research, or trying to figure out a new way of detecting these things? And if so, have you had the conversations? Anybody here? And you know, does that look like something that we could utilize in the future? And as you answer that, I'm just going to check on my daughter, please. My apologies.
What I can say is that we're always looking for signatures. I'm not going to go specifically as to what those signatures might or might not look like, but everything in nature, everything in our reality perturbs the environment in some way, some small way, sometimes in a big way. And whether that's through acoustic energy or electromagnetic energy or heat or whatever, you anytime you introduce mass or matter into a space, you perturb space-time, even gravity to some degree. There's fluctuations, micro fluctuations in gravity fields. So we are indeed looking at signatures. The question is, which signatures are the best telltale sign of UAP activity? And I'm not convinced we're quite there yet, but I think we're getting close, and we're certainly asking the question.
Sean, any comment on the science aspect of that? I mean, anything?
Well, it's as Lou was saying, and as we were kind of alluding to before, we have to take a full spectrum approach, because we don't have a nomenclature list to look at and say, okay, well UAP produces this kind of telltale signature. We don't have a dedicated list of things to look for. So when we ask about specific things, I would say we want to throw the kitchen sink at it, but we want to do it in a pragmatic sense. The data has to be looked at, and it has to matter. So that's all. I think that we're still determining what we're looking at, and so that's going to determine the tools that we utilize to look at it.
Yeah,
I agree.
Absolutely. Yeah, it makes perfect sense, really, doesn't it? I've got a few questions that I've been bombarded with, let's say. And Sean, given the fact that we've not really heard too much from you, I've had so many people asking what's going on with Skyfort. Where have they been? Where are they at? What's happening? So I kind of had to ask, really.
It's pretty simple. Skyfort exists, first of all, to get the job done. And the charter that we gave ourselves was to connect like-minded people, professionals in academia, in government, in the military, and in the private sector, to talk about this subject, to socialize the important and pragmatic data points, and to just create a comfort zone for rational discussion. We're not so concerned about enriching ourselves, advertising, becoming big names, or anything like that, and that confuses some people. We just don't have time for that kind of thing. I think, as you guys know, that when you get involved in, and I've demonized monetization before, I'm not going to do that right now, but you know that if what you're doing has to keep your lights on, it becomes a different kind of job, and you approach it differently. I'm a pensioner. I chose to do this for now on my pension because it helped me keep my ethical set together. It helped me keep my morals centered to this. And I didn't need anything out of this other than to try to make things easier for other people where it had been hard for me. So that sounds like I'm dancing around the answer, but I'm not. We talk to people, and a lot of times, I won't take credit for any edifice or things that have passed or anything like that. But did we have a hand in it? We certainly did, because we spent countless hours talking to people and saying, listen, I know that you don't think this is real. I know that you've been filled with a lot of nonsense. Here's where I was. Here's what happened. Here's the data. Here's some videos, and here's some more people you should talk to. And in a lot of ways, for people that work in government or military or science, having the bona fides of having been in for 20 years, having been a recognized person that was at an incident that has already been socialized in the public that they can see, it makes it safe for them to approach this subject. And once they've approached the subject, a lot of these folks, I never speak to them again. I'm not going to name drop, but I talked to Eric Weinstein about a year ago, and I'm not any elusive person that he may have spoken about. I'm just another guy he talked to on the phone. But I was part of the process of going, thanks for taking my call. Yes, I'm not kidding. This is real. You don't have to believe me. Just please look at this data and decide for yourself. And that's the chance that so many of us have been asking for so long with what we call leadership or the media or government, that we're finally there. These people who are institutional leaders are taking this seriously.
Do you think that should also spread to cultural figures as well? Is that something that's come up?
Absolutely. It's while people turn to folks like Lou and I for answers so often, or for our personal conclusions,
Yeah.
and I know that Lou and I both try really hard to withhold some of those because I don't want my conclusions to inform another person because my conclusions change all the time based on the data. However, it's pretty clear to almost any of us who spend a few minutes really thinking about this that we need our spiritual leaders, we need our thought leaders. We need those of who are in the consciousness sciences. They all need to get involved because although we don't understand these finer aspects that may or may not involve personal consciousness or group consciousness, the people who understand those realms the best are the ones that should be taking over this subject. I'm a generalist. I don't belong in the laboratory. I'm a communicator and an interlocutor, but we need the experts, those who own the study, to take their portion of UAP and own that as well, and then return the data back to all of us.
Yeah, absolutely. And one thing that's really been hitting my inbox this week as well, and it has been spoken about, I think I've spoken to Lou about it before, is how do we engage people, whether it be friends, family members, work colleagues, how do we engage them on this subject when they've really never heard about it or talked about it other than seeing it on a sci-fi movie or a documentary? You know, people are still so desperate to engage with their friends and family just to kind of say, please talk about it. Talk to me about my interest. Can we just go over that again in a way? Like how do people take that first step in your opinions?
I'm gonna probably tick some people off, and I'm gonna say first, you have to ask yourself if you're validation seeking.
Right.
And we're human beings. We need that. We need that validation. But how much of that is the need to communicate your story? It's understandable. But people who have not had those experiences that are so out of the realm of normalcy that I won't fish for psychological terms. There's a wall that drops down. And a lot of times because that person loves us or cares about us or has a relationship, we get a lot of grace from them. And they tune us out just like we're telling them about a television show that they don't care about, because that's as deep as they can get with it. They haven't wrapped their head around some of the implications of the reality of this. And so we have to be gracious when it comes to our family members that seem like they don't care about something that is so important to us that it's tearing the heart out of us. It's keeping us up at night. It focuses our interests. But at the same time, you can't fall into the confirmation bias bubble of just finding the people who think what you think and staying there. So it's tough. That's why I say it's so personal. I have the same challenges with my family. Some of my family was here recently, and they were the ones asking the questions, but it seemed like every time the answer started, the glaze came over. And when we were done, it was just, okay, well, what's for dinner? There was no follow-on conversation. So it's very confusing. It's tough. You have to approach it with grace.
Yeah, absolutely. Dan, do you have anything to add on that? Because sorry, Dan, before you jump in, I know you've had experiences in the past. Do you feel that that's helped you talk about it, saying, look, I've seen something or done, experienced this? Because a lot of people haven't, and they're just genuinely interested in it.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely a different quality to the discussion when you've had an experience with something anomalous. You've got a personal stake in it, I guess, when that happens, because when people dismiss it, it makes you feel like you're crazy when you're grappling with reality, maybe not being as fixed as the world has told you growing up, and that can be real scary. So I really appreciate the moments like this, and Luca and Sean and yourself as well, Vinny, just talking in the community and providing the space where you can share those experiences without being laughed out of the room. It really helps you kind of drill down and just process properly and integrate those feelings, as opposed to just putting them in some dark closet and carrying on with your 9 to 5 and over the long term creating yourself some real trauma, I guess.
If I can jump on too real quick, I agree with you, Dan. We're talking about a topic that challenges people from, depending on how you were raised in your culture, slightly different. I mean, there are There are real theological considerations. There's sociological considerations. There's philosophical considerations, and there's psychological considerations. And each person is going to react slightly different to this topic. And what I would do is, when you have a conversation, have it in a way where you say, look, this conversation doesn't have to conflict with whatever preconceived notions you already have, or the value system that you already have in place, or what you think about the notion of God or a creator or anything else. It doesn't have to be a direct assault or an affront on the preconceived narrative you already have. Look at it as just additional information to help inform you of what's around you. It's very much like, and I keep going back to this, when Galileo proposed, using some of the principles of Copernicus, that the sun, the Earth, was not the center of the solar system. That rocked the boat, right? There are people that refuse to even look through the very telescope that he was trying to prove the point. At the end of the day, it didn't. It was perceived to have challenged the church at the time, but now we look back and we say, well, that's nonsensical. All it does is show you the grandeur and beauty of the universe for what it really is, right? If anything, it expands your appreciation of potentially a higher creator, the notion of one. And I guess what I would do is say, look, when you have a conversation about UAPs, it doesn't have to conflict or contradict people's narratives that they already have in their brain. Hopefully, if it's done properly, it can help them augment and assimilate new data, new information, and help build upon whatever narrative that they're building for themselves. Again, I don't think it has to be a destructive force. I think it can be a constructive force if handled properly.
Yeah, absolutely. One thing again, another thing that has been filling my inbox is what's happening in the government, in the Congress, DOD, Pentagon. Who's looking at the subject right now? Is it still the UAP task force? Have we moved on to AOI MSG, or have the new office, has it been implemented and is working? Where are we at? I think people are just a bit like in the dark.
I suspect that's a question for me.
I guess so. I mean, I didn't want to pinpoint it, but please.
I can't speak on behalf of the government, but what I can say is that I think we're in a period of transition in a good way. You are now, as I've mentioned before, how we're shifting into gears. For the last 4 years, we have these little milestones that we hit and then we shift into the gear. Well, I think you're seeing that with the government. I think you see the government finally shifting into first gear on this, and the car moving out of neutral and beginning to gain some momentum and some energy and some steam. You have some discussion that will at some point potentially dissolve the UAP task force. Maybe it decides to come back in a different fashion. You have a governance board or an oversight committee at the USDI. You have the services, to include the Navy and the Army, and the Air Force to some degree, not as much as we would like, coming to the table and having conversations. You have the discussion of key individuals who will actually be running this, and to my relief and delight, it's no longer the individuals who were stonewalling this topic to begin with. That was my fear initially when USDI, my old office, was given charge to this. But I think cooler heads prevailed, and I think people realize that we need fresh blood in there to look at this topic if we're gonna get ahead of it and really try to figure it out. We have members of Congress that are being informed on a regular and routine basis, and their staff, who are doing, by the way, incredible work behind the scenes. Like I've never seen it work. I've never seen it, I hate to say functional, but I haven't. You have, true bipartisan support. You have people on opposite end of the aisles who probably wouldn't even look at each other under normal circumstances, co-sponsoring law on a topic of one that involves UFOs of all things, right? So it's working, and these are big time politicians like Gillibrand and Marco Rubio and Congressman Tim Burchett and Gallegos, and there's a laundry list. And by the way, that coalition's growing. And so it's going to make it increasingly difficult if anybody wants to try to push the if you will, the proverbial genie back in the bottle. I don't see how that can happen at this point. I think we can. The only direction we can move now is forward. I don't see this ever getting back into the bottle. I think we have reached disclosure that people were looking for, and I think now we're shifting into something new, which is understanding. So we've disclosed the reality; they're real. We don't know what they are yet. Now we are shifting into a new paradigm and a new era where we now have accepted the reality of these things. Now we just need to figure out collectively what we want to do about it.
That's encouraging. Thank you. Now, I believe, if I'm right, there should be some classified briefings happening within the Congress in the next month or two. And I think last summer, preliminary assessment, we heard a few voices from some of these senators, congressmen, and that, not saying too much, but we knew or kind of heard that they'd had these briefings. And do you expect us to hear little tidbits again, not of information about UAP, but that yes, these classified briefings are had and come out into the news and the media?
Yeah, there has been some really historic things happening behind the scenes, and Congress owes it to their constituents to be transparent and provide the information that, frankly, the people deserve, and Congress is committed to that. For every voice you hear vocally out about this topic in Congress, there's 5 more in the shadows that have had their own, believe it or not, UAP encounter, but they're just not ready to go public with it yet. They pulled me aside and said, "Look, you're not going to believe this, but I had my own encounter." I said, "Well, actually, yeah, you'd be surprised. I do, because I hear this a lot. And they said, listen, I don't want to go public with this, but it was pretty extraordinary." So, we're getting there every day, closer and closer and closer. And again, I think we need to stop looking at, at this point, well, when are we going to have disclosure? You've had it. It's there. It's now law. It's that we are past the Rubicon on that. So if you're looking for it, then you're wasting your time, because we've already had that. We are now at a point where our government, our senior elected officials, our senior intelligence officials, our senior defense officials have all acknowledged the reality. It's real. Okay, so now let's move on. Where do we go from here? And that is in large part because of the work that you, Vinnie, and Dan, and your wonderful audience have done about this topic. I mean, you guys mobilized a virtual army to write letters to their representatives and in your country to your ministers of parliament. That's historic. I mean, people are now listening. They're paying attention. They're saying, "Hey, there's something to see here, folks. This is serious." And that only happened because of folks like you and your audience. Sean and I are only 2 people. We can only do so much. Ultimately, at the end of the day, it takes an army or a village, depending how you look at it. And we've achieved that collectively. And how wonderful it is that we can all sit here and talk together and have this conversation. My only regret is that we could, every member of your audience couldn't have one of these screens, and we could all see everybody. Wouldn't that be great? And we could all have this conversation together. Maybe we'll have the technology soon to do that, but I would love nothing more. I mean, can you imagine have everybody right now in your audience on a screen like this, for all of us to just interact and talk, right? I mean, that's magic, man. That's how we win.
Part of me wonders if kind of, the age we're in now is this age of communication where we're all connected no matter where we are on the planet. Some better than others, but we're all talking. And people always ask, why now? Why is this happening now? And I wonder if that isn't part of it, that we're all actually starting to properly connect and talk to each other.
Dan. So. I'm sorry.
Yeah, go ahead, Sean. No, go, please.
Dan, you and I dip into the esoteric side of meditation and consciousness a lot. And I was thinking about this the other day, because the question of why now frustrates the hell out of me every time I hear it. Especially when someone tries to apply it to my own life. They're like, "Why are you doing that now?" Half the time, I don't know, because I'm doing it now. And I think that's the answer. It's because when is it? It is now. It's always now. So the fact that you have noticed something is occurring, if you weren't part of the planning or you didn't have heads up on it, it's a surprise. Well, that's why, because you didn't know. That's why, none of these things happened overnight. Kind of like as the folks in the government find out it's real, as we've established that as Lou said, that disclosure has happened. But all these people are going, but I haven't heard it yet. Well, the world doesn't revolve around what's been announced to you in your feed. It trucks along without the rest of us. So a tipping point has been reached, but perhaps the tipping point that Pop UFOs expected and wanted hasn't been reached yet. But that's not necessarily the thing we were ever aiming for. We're aiming for ground state truth that we can share and socialize and solve. So
absolutely correct, Sean. Absolutely couldn't say it better myself. I think most people have in their head what disclosure means. The problem is that's not really what it means. That's their idea of what disclosure means, right? Disclosure simply means the acknowledgement of a fact, and that's where we are. So it may not be exactly the flavor that a lot of people were expecting, but for me, it's I think it's a damn fine start. I think we have received more in the last 4 years in the way of momentum and support than we have in the last 75 years. And there's a level of dignity and respect now to this topic that wasn't there before. A lot of people say, oh, well, there was really good researchers. And yeah, I know there were good researchers, but it didn't lead to anything. It led to an echo chamber where people could have a conversation among themselves, but it didn't do anything. We weren't able to get government off its ass and do something, and get the military, and get the intelligence community, and get the scientific community, and get the academic community, and you see where I'm going with this, right? So a lot has happened in the last 4 years, and anybody who doesn't acknowledge it, well, you continue living in la la land if you want, but we're going to continue doing what we're doing, and the momentum is building every day, more and more and more and more, and more data is coming out, and more incidents are being reported. And by the way, I've said this before, people look at the image, well, we haven't heard anything since the Roosevelt. Well, you haven't been listening very well, because these things are happening every week now. I mean, like every week things are happening. It's a pretty big deal, and the government is now taking this very, very seriously.
Indeed. Gentlemen, listen, I'm going to close it out soon, but before, I'm going to go around and ask each one of you, what's next? So Dan, let's start with you. What's next for Dan Zetterstrom?
It's a very good question. I've got coming up my own podcast show where we're going to kind of be running off into the forest a little bit and just kind of delving into a little bit of the more esoteric subjects that this one touches against. When that'll launch, I don't know. It was meant to be January, but then Colombia happened, and life just gets crazy. But it'll launch when it's ready to launch, I guess, when it kind of hits my quality bar. Look to that UFO podcast for any of my other stuff. I'm sure you'll see me produce a lot of art to do with the Colombia trip. And a lot is already pouring out of me. So yeah, just keep an eye. Eventually, Vinnie and I will do a show as well where we just go over a lot of footage that we took in Colombia, kind of a behind the scenes of the documentary, if you will. I think that'll be a lot of fun.
Oh yes, it will indeed. We made sure that with all the focus on the documentary series being made, filmed, and the research and investigation and everything, me and Dan were there with our phones. We wanted to do something for everyone, like Dan said, so we could sit here and just show behind the scenes and the beauty and the people and the experience. So look out for something very soon on that, everybody. So Sean, let's move on to you. What is next for Sean Cahill?
Well, in a lot of ways, this may sound presumptuous to some people, but in a lot of ways, there's a tiny little mission accomplished banner hanging in Skyfort's mental offices. What we set out to do has occurred here in the United States. Now, to us, it's important. You guys know this because you're deeply involved with it. We want to export that ideal across the pond into the Great White North and anywhere else that's receptive to it. Because as you guys know, it's about communication, it's about authenticity, it's about being additive, using the data, and trying to create pathways of understanding. We haven't tried to corner the market on anything. We're not asking for a spotlight or for money or anything like that. And you guys understand that worked for us. And we want to help not export that ideal. I don't want to put any of those silly phrases on it or anything like that, but we want to give all of our best practices to you guys. And then in as much of a legal way that we can, help advise or give advice as it's solicited. That's what's important to me, is to keep this ball rolling, because it doesn't just exist within the microcosm of the United States, and it doesn't just exist in the West or in the Northern Hemisphere. This is something that's going to have to eventually reach all of humanity, and it's decisions we're going to have to make together, or we're just going to keep repeating the same mistakes. So that's what's next for me. The journey never ends. Tiny little banner of mission accomplishment. Now it's time to try to carve off a bigger mission.
Beautifully said. Thank you. Lou, what's next?
Well, hopefully Mexican food and a big margarita tonight. If I'm lucky, that's what I'd like to do. That's what is an immediate radar. But I suppose you're not asking that.
Well, no. Do you know what? You don't have to say anything. And I will reiterate this, because I've said it to a lot of people today. This wasn't an interview where Lou is put in the chair and asked questions, give us information. I wanted this to be a conversation between friends. So if the next thing you do is simply that's what's happening. It's all good.
You know what? There's two things. One, expect that we are going to be shifting into high gear here. We're going to be if you think we've made a splash so far, you ain't seen nothing yet. There's going to be some announcements this year, I think, that are going to hopefully resonate. I will tell you that I'm going to steal a little saying here that Sean has told to me over and over again, and I'm going to steal it because I really like it. We are going to transform the notion of men in black. We want to be the men in Technicolor, completely transparent, and let everybody see everything that we're doing. Nothing's hidden in the shadows. We think transparency and sunlight is the best antiseptic to anything, especially a topic that's been kept in the shadows for over 75 years. So expect us to take that and try to dismantle any type of over secrecy on this topic. Now, let me caveat over secrecy. Okay, there's going to be portions of this topic that are still going to remain classified, and that's just, we got to get over it. That's just the reality of things. But the vast majority of it doesn't have to be, and that's what we want to do. We want to bring light to this topic, and there's other means and mechanisms that we can do. And I think some of those are going to start to become very apparent here within the following months and this year. I think people will look back and say, oh, that's what Lou and Sean meant. We've stopped just long enough to pat each other on the back, and we're still moving forward. We're not resting on our laurels. We're not sitting down and relaxing and looking at our achievements or accomplishments, because we're too focused on the next hill we have to take. So I think that's what you can expect, other than the Mexican food and the margarita.
Yes, excellent. Now, before you go, if you don't mind, I just want to read through the people. I've tried to make a list of everybody that donated. I'm literally want to read their names out for donating to this cause so that we can all thank them. So Paranormal Pixie Lara, Zprep, DJ San Marco, Lee Kim 39, William Calamari, Witness Citizen, David Pierce, Ellie Cahill, Tokyo Driftstar, Nando, Eve Clancy, Angel Star Rising, Linda Thompson, Teresa Bournes, Mel Taylor, Shelley Montgomery, Paul Vidal, A Spring Inside, Noah Campbell, Kay Kira, Linda Thompson, The Unidentified Celebrity Review, Carbine's Right, Obi Flett, and Zprep again. Thank you all so much. Every single one of you donated without having a question regarding UAP. You donated purely for the
major thanks, guys. Great job. Thank you for everyone, all your listeners out there, and especially the ones that donated for this cause. Thank you. A lot of those names I recognize. I try to say hi wherever I can, to Linda and company. Thank you. It means a lot. You are helping shape and improve the lives of people out there. And, thank you for, to some small degree, restoring my faith in my fellow humans, because together we can. There's no stopping what we can achieve. There's no stopping what we can do together. So, and Vinnie and Dan, huge major thanks for you guys to put this on. It was very generous of you to donate your super chat to a good cause like this, especially people who really need it right now. And I mean really need it. you know, thank you for what you do. And, you know, Sean, as always, brother, love you, man. See you shortly. So
Talk to you tomorrow. Yeah.
I actually talked to you about 5 minutes.
Well, listen, one thing I will say is to everybody, I will be showing proof of the donation because I know that's going to be the next thing that people ask me for. I will be showing that. So listen, everybody, and everybody that didn't donate, I just want to say thank you for such a great and cordial chat room tonight. We don't seem to have any, you know, I don't know what the word is, but problems, let's say, in the chat. You have all been so awesome. And this is what we want more of. This is a great community, and we will go forward together. So listen, Dan, thank you so much. Sean, thank you so much. And Lou, thank you so much. I really appreciate all of you. And we'll do this again soon, please.
Absolutely.
Can't wait.
Yeah,
Take care,
absolutely.
gentlemen.
So
Take
for everybody,
care, guys. Thanks for
I'll
having
see you
us.
all soon. Take care.
Good night, guys.